Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you all had a great lunch, and we are ready for our panel discussion. Today, the panel is entitled Software and AI as a Medical Device, Regulatory Pathways and Guidance to the Industry. Today, we have Bahram Parvinian, Lighthouse Regulatory and Technical Consulting, Mannan, Magnacarta, Mark Ostrowski, Checkpoint, Priya Mannan, Novartis, and Jacob Agris, Bayer. Please welcome our panel.
Does it matter the order?
Doesn't matter.
Oh, good.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for sticking around after lunch on day 2. I really appreciate this. Our panelists will appreciate it, but we have a very exciting topic today, and I'm hoping we will have lots and lots of questions and discussions and feedback as we move along with this panel. Just to introduce myself, my name is Priya Mannan. I have been an Associate General Counsel at Novartis about 11 years now, and I'm primarily a lawyer by training, and I support my company on data and digital initiatives, especially in the legal regulatory framework. So that's what I do every day, and I'm excited to get to work every day. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. Mark Ostrowski from Checkpoint. We are a security company at heart, and where we intersect with the healthcare industry is where we're spending a lot of time developing visibility and compliance and enforcement onto IoT, and then IoT sort of then naturally sort of moves its way into healthcare, into the connected devices inside of a hospital bed, for example. So I work out of the Chief Technology Office, specifically around talking about how we're leveraging cloud and AI and machine learning to do better, a better approach to identifying malicious or security incidents that are deriving from, in this case, medical devices.
Thanks. I'm Jacob Agris from Bayer. My background is a physician and engineer. My responsibility is in the R&D group. I not only head up, we like to call it AI because it's popular, but software team, and also set some of our vision and direction for our diagnostic and software products.
Bahram Parvinian. I'm a mechanical and biomedical engineer. Started working for FDA around 2007, and after 12 years last year, I decided to start my own consulting firm, and generally consult on medical devices and the spectrum of medical devices, but mainly focusing on critical care systems, decision support systems, and software as medical device.
My name is Mannan, and I'm an IP attorney from Boston, and I have been consulting clients on IP matters for the last 16 years. And in my previous life, I had an opportunity to work for Pfizer for 10 years. And then why I am here, because in my opinion, the major improvements in the AI applications to healthcare is going to come from small startup companies supported by venture funds. And when you're dealing with venture funding, you need to make sure that your invention is IP protected. And there are a lot of things going on to give a strong IP protection for AI-related inventions. So probably I thought I could share some of those new developments happening in this field.
So I want to start with, we have about 3 segments here. We're going to talk about the FDA piece of it, the framework, the current regulation, the guidance, and what's anticipated. And then we'll talk about intellectual property and what rights, how can we protect those for software as a medical device. Then we will transition into our cybersecurity space to see what's important from that angle. And then we also have our esteemed guest from Bayer, who will also tie into the regulatory realm from a pharma industry and diagnostic perspective. So that's what you're going to hear from the panel today. So I'm going to start with Bahram, our ex-FDA expert who has his own consulting company. And I just want to know, So with your transition from working for the agency for many, many years and then coming into consulting, you're now talking to many of your clients. What are the things that your clients are looking for, in terms of the regulatory space? What are their questions? I'm sure there are a lot of folks here who would like to know, what if I am a small company that I'm starting something in the AI space, what is it that I should look out for from an FDA perspective?
Well, the number one question I get is, are we regulated? And to what bucket do we belong, essentially? And people who actually ask that kind of questions, they're coming at it from two opposing angles. Some of them, they do not want to be regulated, and some of them actually want to be regulated. And this was a surprising piece of information for me, because apparently, for some of these software medical device companies, the backbone of their finance and their funding, their VCs, they want their device to be regulated because they consider a device that's regulated as a device that actually does something that meets an unmet public health need. And also for reimbursement purposes, apparently they want the device to be regulated so that they can get reimbursed. And so on the other side of the spectrum is a company that comes to me and they don't want to be regulated, and they want me to assess the regulation, assess the technology, and give them a response in terms of to what bucket they actually belong. So those are the first two questions I get. And then after that, it's mainly regulatory pathway and the evidence generation and all those things.
So do we see regulation as a good thing or a bad thing in the AI space?
So I think smart regulation, balanced regulation is a good thing. I think it provides an opportunity to filter out a medical device that is inventive, and it's from a device that is innovative. For example, a device that's just purely produces something new versus a device that is new and actually does something for public health, enhances safety and effectiveness of a treatment or a diagnosis. So overall, I think it's good.
I know you spent many years at the Center for Device and Radiological Health, which is also known as CDRH, which regulates the device business. What are your thoughts, having been with them, with the agency for so many years, and how the guidances have evolved in the last maybe, 5 to 7 years or so? Can you share something, what the thinking has been by the agency?
Yeah. So when I first started, it would take years to get a guidance out. Having a first-hand experience and working on one and never actually getting a guidance out. And starting 2012, I would say that the agency really started focusing on a more efficient guidance issuance process. And right now we see guidance is coming out of the agency. In order for them to stay on top of this fast-evolving area, there are numerous now guidances related to AI systems and software as a medical device, clinical decision support systems, and I really applaud the agency in terms of the effort and the time that it takes to issue, not just write these guidances, but to get them through the regulatory and approval process and get them out. So.
Thank you. So just shifting gears here from an intellectual property perspective, Ram, what do you think? Because there's just a lot going on in the artificial intelligence space, and you may want to talk about what's the traditional paradigm in inventorship, and where are we headed?
Yeah, there are a lot of things going on in the intellectual property related to AI. And first of all, both United States Patent Office, Patent and Trademark Office, and the US Congress are taking initiatives to assure that there is a strong intellectual property protection. This is because there are some recent happenings that triggered this very aggressive action both on USPTO and on the US Congress. And when you're talking about intellectual property protection for AI-related invention, there are 3 categories. You can protect your AI-related invention in terms of patent filing and patent grant, or you can treat that as a trade secret, and then you can protect that way. And the third option is getting a copyright for your software programs. And first, talking about the patent protection. When it comes to patent protections in the United States, you need three different things. Your invention should be novel, non-obvious, and then third is it should fall in one of these subject matter categories. There are 4 different subject matter categories recognized by the US patent law. One is your invention should be a machine or a manufacture or a composition of matter or a process. And if your invention is outside these 4 categories, it's very difficult to get through the first hope. And in addition to this requirement to have your invention fall within one of these 4 categories, during the last 100 years, United States Supreme Court has created some carve-outs for the subject matter categories. For example, your invention is based on a natural law or a natural phenomena or an abstract idea, you cannot get a patent. And when it comes to abstract idea, in the definition is a little bit broader. It may be a mathematical concept or a mental process or steps in doing some human activities. So in spite of these restrictions, during the last 10 years, a lot of patents have been issued in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning for the simple reason, although they may have some abstract ideas, if your invention is providing a technical solution for a technological question, you can still get that patent granted. That way, there are a lot of patents have been granted during the last 10 years. But in 2014, there was one Supreme Court decision in which they invalidated on a software-related patent. And that time, the Supreme Court came out with a framework to determine what is an abstract idea, whether invention has got an abstract idea. So they came out with a 2-step analysis process. And since 2014 to 2019, applying this regulatory framework given by Supreme Court, some of the software patents were invalidated, so there was a real concern. And then there was a need for the government to jump in. So that's the reason United States Patent Office and the US Congress has stepped in to fix this problem. And they are going very aggressively. First, looking at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, earlier this year, they came out with their examiner guidance. So whenever you file a patent application, you should go to an examiner, and he looks at the patent filing, and then he examines it, and he grants the patent or rejects the patent. So the US Patent Office wanted to train patent examiners, particularly in this field of artificial intelligence and machine learning, how to look at the exam. So they gave very nice guidance, and also they gave a lot of specific examples. So if you're going to have an invention related to AI or software in general or machine learning, you can look at the guidance, and you can come out with some real nice way of structuring your disclosure and structuring your claims. That's one thing USPTO has done. Second thing is, as of August 2019, in the Federal Register, United States Patent and Trademark Office published 12 questions related to patent protection for artificial intelligence. So essentially, US Patent Office wants to make sure what would be the impact of AI innovations on patent process in a whole, and if there is any need to modify the existing patent laws. So they came out with the 12 questions, and they asked public to give a written comments. And the comment period ended November 8th, last Saturday. And as of Saturday, I saw 27 comments. Still, it's not publicly available, but probably next week it will become publicly available. So the idea was, US Patent Office wants to find out what general public wants to see for protecting the patent rights for the intellectual property through AI innovations. And then last October 30th, that's 10 days ago, USPTO gave another federal notice in which it asked how copyright law should be modified to protect the AI innovations. And that comment period is still open, so if anybody is interested in protecting your AI innovations and you want to be a spokesperson for your company or your organization, please take a look at that USPTO federal notice and then see whether you can submit some comments. Probably in the next couple of months, all of them will be consolidated. And based on these activities by the director, ANCO, the USPTO director, ANCO, there is a committee in the US Senate Judiciary Committee. There's a subcommittee of US Senate Committee that's called Subcommittee on Intellectual Property. And that is chaired by Senator Tillis from North Carolina, and the ranking member in the committee is Senator Kuhn from Delaware, and they are really working very closely. It's really a bipartisan effort to start necessary changes in the US patent law. So as I told you that it needs to be in 4 different categories, and if there is an abstract idea, you may have some problem. So the first thing they are addressing is that modify that particular section, section 101 of the US patent law. And they are very aggressive from the fact that they had a hearing on June 4th, 5th, and 11th, totaling about 12 hours, and they listened to 45 witnesses from industry, academia, and trade organizations. So they have combined all those things, and they have come out with a proposal to modify the 101 so that it is not going to affect any of this software-related or AI-related patents. So that's happening there in the US Congress. So based on these things, there is a promising future for protecting your patent rights or copyright rights with reference to AI innovations. So I think we are in a very good shape.
Thank you. That sounds like a great opportunity, especially coming from the USPTO, from some of the regulatory agencies too, from the FDA, from the USPTO. This sounds like an opportunity that they want to keep up with the manufacturers, especially with the artificial intelligence manufacturers, because it's so it's evolving so fast. Mm-hmm. So I want to turn around and talk to my cybersecurity expert here.
Something different.
And see what are the opportunities here? What are your challenges when you're talking to companies? I know you're working with my company, for example. Yep. So what are your challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think where I can perhaps add some value to the conversation is around just in general of how AI is being adopted. Even outside of pharma or healthcare, but just in general. I'm staring at a Roku TV, right? So when you buy a Roku TV, it's less expensive. It's less expensive because you put your information and you create an account to turn the TV on, right? So it gets to the whole regulatory component of that as well. How we were talking about that before we came up here. So it gets to the point of how can AI be used in a responsible manner, right? So in my TV example, is it okay for folks to mine what we watch and what we do as part of a service to get a less expensive TV to directly advertise to us, right? It's a good question. So when you talk about AI in the security space, you don't get a lot of pushback from folks saying, we're not going to leverage the artifacts or data to create a more secure environment for, in this particular case, healthcare devices. But what we have to realize is that there is no prejudice for attackers coming after medical devices, right? And I think we can all sit in this room and agree that at least in the hospital space, the amount of security that's being deployed is not necessarily up to the standards that we're seeing in other verticals, mostly because of the challenge is that it actually is a life and death situation, right? So to employ security into a hospital room, it's more important that this patient lives than it is to really necessarily to monitor every aspect of a specific device. So what we're doing specifically in this area is that we're taking the huge amount of data that we're getting on a daily basis. So just to give you an idea, we see about 86 billion artifacts that hit our threat intelligence cloud on a daily basis. So that's more than a Google search, Google has in a search on a given day. So then what we do is we use our own AI and machine learning and algorithms, and we're able to decipher and to be able to use basically essentially math, right, to key in on where malicious activity is coming from, and where it's going to, and starting to draw, very, very concrete conclusions of how IoT devices are actually behaving. So if you look at a lot of the specific attacks that are relative to the healthcare space, it's a very traditional attack. There's nothing unique about it. And they go after specific devices, typically running older versions of software. And so what we're able to do is we're able to take that huge amount of security intelligence data, learn and discover all the medical devices, and then apply our AI methods against that, and then in hopes to be able to provide a much higher level of security in the specific space, without actually deploying something in front of it, right? So I mentioned it is kind of a life and death situation, right? So no one wants to put a device in front of a device. So we're able to do this, on an out-of-band method, but then be able to provide prevention so that these devices cannot connect to a malicious command and control or things of that nature. So it's a kind of a slightly different approach to some of the conversations we've had on the panel, but I think it's very, very relative to what we're trying to do in this space, right? Having smart AI and algorithms, making our world around us a little safer, but specifically keen on discovery of medical devices and IoT devices, and then applying our security intelligence on top of that to give a better product that's focused in the healthcare space.
So I just want to piggyback on when the FDA is looking at these medical devices from a safety and efficacy perspective, are they also looking to see they can potentially be hacked? I'm just curious to know, and love to hear your thoughts, Mark, on that too.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
why don't you go? You go first. I'll piggyback on it.
So this came to the FDA as a safety signal in 2015, 2016, after there were reports of hacking infusion pumps, and actually some patients hacking their own insulin infusion delivery devices, actually, and there was reports of that in Wall Street Journal and everything. So the agency actually reacted by putting out a couple of draft guidances. One of them, I think, is final on the content that they would like to see in marketing applications on cybersecurity measures, and it's pretty comprehensive, and that a lot of. It has created a little bit of a bottleneck for some of the manufacturers that have already, for example, submitted 510Ks, and they want to establish substantial equivalence to their own device. But because of this new safety measure, they have to update their security measures. They have to update their privacy measures and make sure that the risks associated with these privacy concerns and security concerns are mitigated in their new marketing application. But I think the industry is catching up with FDA requirements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Bahram.
I mean, the only thing I would add is that use case is the exact use case that we're looking, right, to provide more visibility into, right? So if you have a pump or a specific device, the behavior of those devices should be finite, right? And a patient shouldn't be able to create that traffic pattern or that behavioral analytics on that specific device, and that's exactly what we're overlapping a strong cybersecurity intelligence platform on top of these devices can actually create that, right? Where I see this and I'll speak obviously from Checkpoint, but also individually, where I see is a tighter cooperation. We're already seeing it on things like home IoT, things like light bulbs and things like that, where folks are embedding code, not security, but embedding code into the devices to determine that devices are behaving in a proper manner. I think the adoption of that in a medical device is going to be a much longer process because of all this regulations and all these things you have to do. But that's where I really see things going much, much further down the line, where you're not going to have an infusion pump that gets released that doesn't have some type of security built into the pump itself, that's reporting up to some type of services cloud that's actually determining the behavior and the direction in which traffic is going. Right, so talk internally is good. Talking to partners and what have you are the correct behaviors. But having a conversation with an IP space that lives somewhere that has no healthcare or pertinence to it should not happen, right? And that's eventually where I see this sort of environment changing too.
Thank you, Mark. So Jacob, I mean, you're with another pharma company, and you're heading up their R&D space in artificial intelligence. Can you speak a few words about what's the priority there? I know you talked about a lot of diagnostics and products in the market for your company, and how are you guys looked at? What are you guys doing to keep up with the artificial intelligence space?
Sure, good question, thank you. So, our interests have been, from a radiology perspective, I'm with Bayer Pharmaceuticals, and they have a large radiology portfolio that includes IoT devices. So those infusion pumps, there's injectors that are also IoT devices. And a comment on that same area, not only do you have to worry about the security of the patient, there we're worried also about viruses and other security measures that have been problems in the last few years, because many of them do have operating systems on them. So that's one area that we have interest in. We also have interest in extending the platforms that we have now for radiation dose planning, contrast dose planning, to diagnostics. And our experience in this area has been in developing the deep learning algorithms around this and some complex systems that we've submitted to the FDA to help with diagnosis. We've gone through the breakthrough device status pathway and are headed towards our first approval in that area. I could comment more on that process, or what would be of interest? Or?
I mean, I'm curious to know, I'm sure the audience would like to know, what type of a pathway did you go with? Is it a 510K pathway, or is it a PMA based on the risk classification? And what did you have to do to gear up to get the predicate device if you're kind of going to be new in the market?
Right, so I think that when you look at the AI marketplace now, there's a lot of smaller companies and startups trying to get into this space, and there's a significant regulatory hurdle. Some of them opt for methods that come through what's called a class 1 device, which sort of would be something that just identifies, like, this patient should have their scan read first. It orders the problem lists, or not the problem lists, but the order things are addressed in. It kind of triages for you, versus trying to actually then identify abnormalities, which is sort of what we call a CAD-E application, or what the FDA calls a CAD-X application, which is a full-blown sort of diagnostic that very few companies have gone through the process for. And that's kind of where we headed with our diagnostics applications. Each of them has a different purpose, and I think the future will hold more integrated data and more around diagnostics, and more people have to go through the higher level of regulatory hurdles and approvals. That can be both good and bad. Obviously, the good part is, they want to make sure patients are safe. The bad part is the hurdles to get through it are higher, both in time and in capital resources. It makes it more difficult for some of these smaller companies, and we're seeing some of the larger companies, household names like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, also entering into some of these spaces. So, times are changing. Going through the regulatory process, as you mentioned, it's not always a choice. Sometimes you have a product description you want to bring to market, and that requires a certain regulatory pathway. When you approach the FDA, you can certainly you have to request breakthrough status, which you can do. I think it has sped things up and is certainly worthwhile doing if your device qualifies. It has to have sort of two features to it. It has to be novel, obviously, but it also has to have significant medical impact. So you need sort of both components. Once you go down that pathway, there's been a fair number of breakthrough status devices granted. I don't have the exact statistics on my fingertips, but many are still in the process. Maybe that's because they're very complex. Maybe that's because there are financial hurdles as well as regulatory hurdles. But it does enable the FDA to put more resources and speed things up for that process. Once you go down that process, it's different whether you're going to be, I don't know if they apply it to class 1 devices. I would suspect it's more class 2 or 3. The PMA is your class 3 device. Once you go down that process, you have to see if you have something called a predicate device, which is a device that they can model their regulatory approval process off of that's similar to yours. If not, then you're going down a different pathway, either a PMA or a de novo pathway. So your device is going to determine the pathway you go down, and if there's a prior device that's similar, that'll determine if it's a 510K, which is the standard class 2 approach, or could be class 1 as well, or whether you're going to end up with a PMA, which is a class 3 device. And then if there's no predicate device, you're going to end up in this de novo process, which not only is there a little higher user fee, but you also will take a little more time, because you're working with the FDA to figure out how to regulate this new device, and that'll then set the standard for other devices in that same area. That said, hopefully people don't aim their devices at a particular regulatory pathway, although I know that happens because of cost and time. At the same time, I guess you need to be aware of it as you get started down the process. The higher the regulatory hurdle, hopefully the greater impact you're having. So, it's a balance between your impact and your return on your investment and your regulatory pathway versus trying a fast, easy, and quicker pathway that may not have as much clinical benefit. I don't know if that kind of brings some weight to it.
Thank you.
Our
Thank you.
experience.
Appreciate it. I just want to dig a little bit deep into the regulatory space. So I'm going to ask the question to Bahram now. Between the locked devices and the ones that has the iterative learning, once the data has been input, the data device becomes adaptive. And where do you see the regulatory framework evolving with the adaptive piece?
Yeah. The regulatory perspective is still very fluid related to machine learning and AI in general. But FDA in April of this year actually issued a white paper, a discussion paper, and I would like to stress that it is only a white paper and the discussion paper. It is not a draft guidance, it's not a final guidance, and I'd be very surprised if it doesn't change before it actually is implemented as guidance. And essentially they classified ML algorithms as locked and the ones that continuously learn and adapt. And essentially almost all of the FDA approved AI devices are of the locked form. And then in that discussion paper, FDA proposes a paradigm for reviewing machine learning algorithms that are meant to be adaptive, continuously learning. And that paradigm involves something called good machine learning practices. So the agency is essentially hinting at the importance of standardization. Bringing people together and standardizing some of the terminology, not just the terminology, but how machine learning algorithms are verified and validated. That is going to be essential for FDA to actually be able to have a paradigm, have a framework to review these systems that actually are meant to continuously learn. And in that paradigm, they also talk about data treatment. They talk about updating. They talk about how a modification is actually is implemented. So it is. They are actually seeking your input on that document. I'm not sure if the comment period is over or if you can. It's over.
Well, there's a new one now, but
I think it's still there. The docket is still open.
The docket is still open. But even if it's not open, you can always email the digital health division with your comments. I've had this, when I was writing guidance documents, the docket was, the deadline would pass, but I was still accepting comments because I wanted to know what's out there and what kind of comments people have. So to give you a little bit of background in terms of a classical, traditional regulatory practice, when we reviewed submissions, say, for example, an investigational device exemption, the manufacturer of the software would come in and with an intended use and indications for use, and they would ask us to approve a feasibility study. And the nature of the feasibility study is such that the device would go through iterations. Maybe the parameters of the algorithm would change. Maybe the type of data that is fed to the algorithm is changed. And then after the feasibility study, we would essentially fix the algorithm so that it could proceed to a pivotal trial. And the reason that it needs to be fixed is for the treatment effect to be understood and to be measured. So it's really a regulatory conundrum for FDA to actually regulate a medical device that is constantly changing and evolving. And I think a standardization piece is a big element of this in order to solidify this plan.
And we talked a little bit earlier about everything is tied to the label, right? So this is going to change the label.
In case of a device, say, for example, that is approved under certain label, what FDA would like to see is that an assurance that not just at the time of approval, but also post-approval, through collection of post-market data for performance data and things like that, the device remains in conformity with its label. It gets more complicated if it's a combination product and drug delivery device, for example. An infusion pump that actually delivers an anesthetic, for example. Say there are algorithms out there that actually do this autonomously right now. So that you can imagine the level of risk of that device. The algorithm needs to comply and conform to the drug label because there's XYZ amount of anesthetic per hour that is on the drug label. And physicians can violate that label because it's practice of medicine, but an algorithm cannot do that. So if AI and machine learning is used as part of that algorithm, then it gets really complicated. And FDA just wants an assurance that you know exactly where the state of this algorithm going to be in this, maybe you can cage it or you can put it in a very, very strict boundaries. So that's where the discussion is at the agency right now.
And we talked about the legal liability too, right, in this space, potentially?
Yes, it's not exactly the FDA, but so when I was reviewing autonomous critical care devices, which was essentially, if you have time, just check this out. It's not rocket science. It's not sci-fi. It's happening. It's actually sponsored by the Department of Defense and Office of Naval Research. So the program is essentially intended for developing a critical care system that autonomously delivers anesthetics, mechanical ventilation, and vasopressor delivery to the wounded warrior at the forefront of the battlefield. It gets them on a drone, an autonomous unmanned drone, and shifts and transfers them to an army base in Germany for 6 hours, keeping the soldier alive, all autonomously. So when we were reviewing those type of things, we were thinking of this, not that it is the primary responsibility of FDA, but we were thinking of very similar type of questions that are now being asked in the autonomous driving. Yes. Well, who is going, in the event of adverse event, who is responsible? Is this the algorithm engineer? Is this the data engineer? Is this the manufacturer? Is it FDA? Is it, so that's another can of worms that, I'm not sure if we have time.
Well, thank you for highlighting this. I do know the FDA, when they started writing the guidance, they were based on the industry guidance, the international, the medical regulators forum, the IMRF. So I think that kind of set the tone in a way, in a positive way, because they were collaborating with the industry in putting this guidance together. They got the feedback when they wrote the guidance, and the guidances are evolving. The AI guidance it's still in the draft stage, but it's evolving. And hopefully all of us can provide additional comments and feedback and make it more robust. But so as I'm looking at, clinical evaluation, security, management, quality standards, distribution networks are going to be changing. The paradigm also changes when you have devices as software. It's not the traditional paradigm where you go to a hospital, you're getting it from a nurse practitioner or a payer or a pharmacy, but this is your own app and you have to use it, as you choose fit, probably with or without guidance, depending on who is using it. So the paradigm is also shifting. So I'm curious to know from you, Jacob, from a pharmaceutical perspective, what are you looking at to see how is it user friendly, and what are you trying to do, making sure that the patient comes first? As we all know, the patients come first, and how are the patients going to be, learning this as the technology advances?
Wow, that's a big question. So we have a device out for beta Cerone already FDA approved. I wouldn't say it elevates itself to that level. To me, I think that is where medicine's going to have to be driven somewhat by data and some of the new advancements. There's lots of advancements. We're seeing them in genetics. We're seeing them in many areas. But data certainly may get rid of some of the waste that has been very difficult to get rid of in the U.S. And there have been numbers, $800 billion to $1 trillion of waste. It seems like a lot of companies are after that because they'll obviously make money by getting rid of waste. We're seeing Amazon or Amazon.care launched. We're seeing Microsoft clearly building up a team in healthcare. We see Google certainly has played in this area as well, both from a cloud perspective as well as a AI diagnostic type algorithm perspective, although I don't think they've taken any of their algorithms through the FDA. You know, tough questions, but clearly applications that help patients reduce waste and deal better with their disease and stay out of the hospital will be crucial and are coming. Amazon.care is already using one for diabetes care. There was one by Google, I don't know if they're still running the program, where they were tracking not only patient location, but dose that they were getting of insulin and so forth in order to provide a virtual assistant to tell you, hey, and I'm making up, you know, kind of a scenario here. Hey, stopping at the Dunkin' Donuts every morning, and then that insulin spike might be correlated. You might want just the coffee, you know. The donut you might want to let go. And if you really couldn't resist, I guess the next step is they could, through their AI, predict maybe changes to your insulin dosing system, which would, of course, have to be signed off by your physician, or a physician, doesn't have to be your physician. You could create your own network of physicians, which was one approach a collaboration was also taking. Obviously, things are changing dramatically. I don't think any longer will you just sell a bottle of something. And your physician certainly, as a physician, you certainly don't just write a prescription anymore, because what's in that bottle no longer costs $10 or $5. It's tens of thousands of dollars. And there's insurance approvals, and that drives our decision making. And then what you're getting in the bottle has changed dramatically, because as you look at some of these genetic treatments, where clearly if you have a certain genetic mutation, they have a pretty good idea what the impact of that drug will be and are giving guarantees. Basically saying, if you don't get better, the insurance company doesn't have to pay. Well, obviously that doesn't help you if you don't get better. That's not the point here. We're back to the patient care.
Yeah.
But certainly they're stepping up as drug companies, saying, now what we've never seen before, here's a guarantee for a drug.
Right.
Which
And it's
is
value-based pricing, right?
Absolutely, and they're on the line because you don't make any money if you don't.
If you
get
don't
better.
get better, don't pay us. Yeah.
Yeah, and now they're also having drugs where you can pay over time. Don't pay us except once a year for 5 years because it costs so much. You know, drugs at over $2 million a dosing. I see heads nodding up and back, but that's where healthcare is going. And now there's insurance for genetic treatments that cost in this price range, separate of your typical insurance. So the world is really, in my mind, changing a lot, and you're getting sort of a combination of a drug and a software product to know who should be treated, make sure they get the right drug at the right time for the right reasons. And who develops that software? Will it be the pharma companies versus big tech versus a new player out of all the milieu of startups? I don't know. If I knew that, I know where to go. But clearly, I think data will drive some of these changes. We're obviously looking at it not just from a pharma perspective that we'd like to get the right patients on the right drugs. Clearly, we look at that, but also as a product from our platform to try and help patients get in that right direction. I would say there's lots of opportunity here, and certainly huge benefit to patients, which often can be translated into benefits to the company in a financial way as well. So we'll see where some of that takes it, but I'd be very supportive, and it's bringing data you have, and we have hurdles. There's other sessions here about some of the hurdles of getting patient data and PHI and all the other problems that surround that. I don't want to go into that now, but it's merging data together, like EMR data, like imaging data, whether it be radiology, pathology, so forth. It's genetic data, and I don't just mean the report that's in the pathology system that says, hey, you have X mutation. It's that sequencing information. And then it's as you spoke about, the IoT devices. You know, how many of us carry a phone? Probably everybody in this room has a phone on them. It gives at least position and activity information, and some may have watches now that can give a whole lot more information. As that gets combined, we can kind of get an idea. Let's just take an example here. The most expensive disease to treat in the US, and I think it's the same in Europe. Anybody have an idea? Most costly in the US? Close, heart failure. It's heart failure. And we've converted that disease. I mean, it used to be 10 years ago that it was acute myocardial infarct. Now it's, that disease is treated. We turned it into a chronic condition that now costs the system a huge amount of money. It's almost like the patient that has a stroke that we convert into a vegetable. But in this case, you're at least mentally with it, which is good. But these patients wax and wane. They come in and out of the hospital. They come in and out of doctors' offices because they're on the edge of being stable. Where we can have impact there is understanding through their IoT devices, their known drug regimens, their known lab values, putting this together to know when is the next exacerbation, can we head it off, can we change their drug treatments, or their activity, or both, or just perhaps inform them about better decision making that could help them to avert ending up in a hospital. It's good for them. I don't know many patients, there are a few, but I don't know many patients that like going to the hospital. And for the system, it just costs a fortune. So I think if we take these big cost ticket items and can develop some software, some of it AI, it doesn't all, I don't believe every piece of software in the world has to be AI forever going forwards. There's other things we work with, but that type of deep learning software to drive understanding along with their EMR and their imaging of how a patient can improve their life will be very important, and head this off. And report that to the physician. Already your EKG from your watch can be shared with your physician. It's a very quickly changing market.
It's the only overlap.
Turn it over that way.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's a great handoff. No, the only the overlap, obviously into our space is that we see as I guess an industry, right? As everybody in this room is developing these types of tools that can be, that give us better care. Right, as a security guy, the thing that I think about is, oh man, I got a watch you can buy, it's a generic vendor, and now it's going to house all this stuff, and now this becomes an area in which can be vulnerable. Like people don't, I think everybody realizes, but the phone is a huge problem, and if that phone now becomes the dispenser of my healthcare, and I want to go after a specific target from a hacking perspective, I don't have to get really complicated other than going after an individual's phone, and I know where they are, right? And I know what their habits are. I know what their heart rates are. I know they go to Dunkin' Donuts in the morning or not, or Starbucks, right? And that's just the reality, right? And in the space that we are right now it's again, aside from the healthcare aspect, but we have scenarios where high target assets are being tracked by their personal devices that fall outside of their corporate environment. It's like the obvious, right? So for me, what scares me in long term is that the security keep up to speed as things that you just mentioned are innovating at. Because if they don't, it becomes obviously a major security risk, right? But that's probably the nice handoff and overlap.
Yeah, you've got to balance, this is my personal opinion, you have to balance your security as well as your access and ability to provide value. If you're taking large security risks with little gain, that's not smart. Obviously the better is obviously what you want, where you take small security risks with big gain, but it's a balance. There's no, I don't know, you can comment, but there's no perfect situation. You don't want to impede the progress, at the same time you don't want to do anything too stupid.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think go ahead.
One comment on.
Sorry, I'll hand it off this way.
No. Just a quick comment on, since you mentioned the EKG on your watch is transferred to your doctor. This technology, the approval of the Apple de novo, and the fact that they can now measure the EKG signal, just allowed for the largest clinical trial in history with the 400,000 patients, and that's mind-boggling. And then just the conclusion of that trial towards better outcomes and what we learn from that. So just want to mention that as a huge benefit that potentially outweighs the risks, depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
But that also brings up a different issue, though. Companies like Apple with I wouldn't say unlimited, but close to unlimited resources. That may not be a big deal, but how do you give opportunity to startups if that becomes the standard? Right. We need to be careful that doesn't become the standard, because then these large companies create hurdles that no one can
meet. Could monopolize.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, one of the things that's happening in the regulatory paradigm is a process called software pre-certification, which is essentially FDA thinking very, very creatively in terms of how to regulate not just a medical device, but an organization. And they want to create a culture of excellence. They want to establish level of trust between FDA and an organization. And guess who would actually benefit from that? The larger companies.
Exactly.
Because they have
more bureaucratic layers.
They have more resources to actually comply with those excellence criteria or whatever FDA wants to call them. So the question, while I 100% agree with FDA that a new paradigm is actually needed to review software, because you can update software, you can update an AI algorithm in a day. But if you were to go back to the FDA every time you update the software, it would take a year, it would take 6 months, at best to hear from FDA. So a new paradigm is needed, but I'm not sure if the model changes to regulating an organization and then setting criteria, then smaller companies may not really have the help that they actually need.
Sure.
And true innovation actually happens with the small companies. So
Hams at both ends. Come on.
Yeah.
But talking about innovation,
I
we want to
understand
talk
small
about
companies do very well.
Yeah.
talking about innovation. We want to talk about who will be the inventor in an adaptive technology. Any last words from Ram?
Okay. Talking about the IP protection for the software as a medical devices, there is an inventor of the hardware and also inventor for a software component, because there is somebody who is coding it, so everything is done. And as of yesterday, what I heard from Chris Corey, Chris Corey from American Medical Association, who gave a keynote address yesterday morning, 85 medical devices have been approved with artificial intelligence component. And so looking at that one, you can say that, okay, this component was decided by this inventor, this component is decided by this inventor, and then based on the patent claims, you can list all of them. But when you are unlocking that artificial software incorporated in this medical device, it is going to learn on its own, and down the road, it will become adaptive, and it is going to learn something new, and it will perform for the better, hopefully. So in that case, who is going to be the inventor? Because the original software evolved on its own. Nobody helped it. So whether AI itself can be an inventor, that's not going to be the case, because according to US patent law or copyright law, the inventor should be a human being. An inventor cannot be a non-human being. So that's the question that's being asked by USPTO in the 12 questions which they posted October 30th. They are asking who should be the inventor of this type of inventions. So probably we have to wait and see how the USPTO and the US government and the US Congress is going to decide.
Well, any other last thoughts? Because we still have about 8 minutes, 8+ minutes left for the audience. Any burning questions? We'll open it up. Yep, go ahead, please.
So you mentioned the breakthrough pathway a little bit. Would you recommend that for a small company as well? And a separate question, could you discuss the advantages and disadvantages of going the trade secret route as opposed to the patent route for AI-based?
You want to take the question first, Bahram?
breakthrough?
Yeah.
Definitely, for sure. As Jacob mentioned, it's a relatively new pathway. So the data in terms of how long actually it takes for the agency to grant one of these is not really out. It used to be called expedited access pathway. And that one really started in 2013, I think. And this one is much more rigorous in terms of its structure, and gives you a lot of opportunities to interact with the FDA, maybe increase your meeting time with the FDA. So puts you in a different bucket. So I highly recommend it, even for small companies.
As far as I know, you're the expert. There's no cost difference, and you just apply for it. So I can't see how you can go wrong. The only thing I would say is, if you fall in that category, you better have enough time and resources to get your product through, with or without breakthrough status, because you probably have something that's not going to be, slam dunk, easy to do. I've seen some companies go through it that go in with very limited funding, and that's a very tenuous situation, because you're probably not going to get through it super fast, and it's probably not going to be super cheap.
Yeah, the criteria for the breakthrough pathway actually implicates that you have to be doing something substantial
Right.
in terms of actually helping and that's usually something new, something novel with different technological characteristics from what is already in the market, because one of the criteria is that there should not be an alternative form of therapy for your device. So be prepared for that. And I see the only downside of the breakthrough pathway is that I think some companies do not manage their expectations. So they're like, oh, breakthrough pathway, we are in, we're just going to get it. It doesn't happen that way. So, and it should not be construed as FDA lowering the bar. They will work with you a lot harder, but the bar is still set.
The patent versus
Yeah, I think there's a significant difference between going for trade secret protection and patent protection. Trade secret protection, till 4 years ago, it was all a state law controlled, but for 2015, there was a federal law came into existence, so there is a federal cause of action. But in the case of trade secret, you keep whatever things you have invented as a trade secret, and if one of your employees goes to your competitor, and if the competitor comes out with the same product, then you have a misappropriation claim. Your competitor has misappropriated a trade secret through somebody who went there. But if your competitor is also doing the same type of research and he is coming out with his own invention and he comes out with the same product, then you don't have any cause of action against the competitor because he independently invented that. On the other hand, when it comes to patent is an exclusionary right. So when you get a patent, you exclude others from doing the same thing, at least for 20 years from the date you filed the application. So that's much more desirable because you don't have to worry about whether it was a misappropriation claim, you can make it, or something else. So you block everybody. So if a competitor wants to develop the same product, they need to come and get a license. So patent protection is a very stronger protection.
So we have at least 3 or 4 more questions here. Would regulating the AI model is required or the device that they support or both?
I would say if the intended use of the device is achieved through the AI model and the actual physical device, I'm assuming they mean a physical device, it would be both. But if the AI model is in a software and it stands alone and no hardware is associated with it, then you would have to only submit for it would be a software as a medical device.
It's also tied to the medical condition. Is it treating or helping
Yes.
with a medical condition?
Just as a follow-up on that, I would say that you also, from a strategic point of view, non-FDA side of it, you want to separate out pieces that either are, you want to separate your class 1 from your class 2 from your class 3 as separate entities. You
Right.
want to avoid this if you can. You can't always avoid it, but if you can, you would want to separate them and then file them
So
separately.
that your approval or clearance process is quicker depending on the classification.
And also, if you update something,
Yeah.
you don't want to update a class 1 device with the same data you would for a class 2, or
Yeah,
it's
because the
particularly not for a
thresholds are
class 2.
same.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know it's risk-based approach, so the
Right.
threshold is different. So is the FDA using AI in-house to quicken the approval process for devices? Good question. Good question.
So AI is approving the AI. I like it.
The insider might know.
Who's going to validate the AI? Somebody within another regulatory agency? No, so not that I know of, but I think the agency has established many initiatives to actually streamline I mean, when I first started with them, our computers were slow. We had only 1 monitor. I mean, I can go on and on and on. But computers got much faster. We had 3 monitors, which means more work. Looking at more monitors means you should be busier, essentially. But not specifically using AI for that particular, not that I know of, at least.
But should they is the question, right?
I think there's potential opportunities.
Opportunity.
Yeah.
There's one use that they are doing it, though, and that's in ADRs or drug reactions. I think they contracted with this, I don't remember the name, I apologize, Canadian company. Hopefully you're not sitting here. I'm embarrassing myself.
My information is limited to CDRH, so I don't know about CDR, whether they're doing it for drug applications or not.
Not the application itself, but all the complaints that come in
Oh, the
about
AE reporting, pharmacovigilance reporting?
the pharmacovigilance reporting, correct, is that they're using some software to automatically code and review some of those.
Oh, that's good. So what is the standard turnaround time for application to approval for IP protection?
At a higher level, I will say it would take 2.5 years to 5 years, but it varies from area to area. For example, if it's a medical devices, it may move faster. If it is a pharmaceuticals, it may slower. But one good thing is if United States Patent and Trademark Office is planning to use AI, do a prior search. When that's rolled in, then the time taken by the examiners will be shortened, so the whole process will improve. So probably if it is taking 5 years now to get a patent, probably with the AI getting implemented at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, it may come down to 3 years. So
at least one federal agency is looking into AI. Which
yeah,
is a good
that
thing.
they have openly disclosed. They are looking at it.
All right, I'm trying to read the last
Yeah, the
question
last one's
here. Does FDA view differently a software that recommends targets for intervention, example, cardiac ablation, that it does computer-assisted detection, CAD?
I think it widely depends for the specific indication that you're after, but
It's tied to the intended use.
and the indications for use, your
Yeah.
intended patient population, but risk profile of the intended
Yeah.
patient population, whether you're doing it in vulnerable patients or you're doing it in healthy patients. They cannot be, well, semi-healthy patients. But generally, I would refer the person who has this question to the new guidance on clinical decision support systems that just came out at the end of September. And the framework in terms of the risk-based framework for the decision support systems, which seems to be the theme of this question, is discussed in that guidance document. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I mean, we are out of time, but if you guys have any questions on all the guidances, there's tons of information out there from an FDA perspective. Just go to fda.gov under CDRH. You should be just type in guidances,
Whether to do the
software as a medical
intervention or
device. You should be able to pull up. If you can't, feel free to shoot me an email or text us. We are happy to share. So there are lots of information out there, lots of proposals, guidances out there, so we're happy to share.
Well, maybe a device that tells the physician to do this.
Thank you all. We really appreciate your
cardiac
time.
ablation or not.